Hi, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I am so excited to be back with you on webinar this year. Our last one was a really great one, and I hope you will go ahead and check that one out. We talked about a lot of things regarding BRIM and RAR connection, so go check that one out. I'm excited to have a whole bunch of you here today, both from clients and all over the globe. So thank you all for joining us. I apologize for starting late. We had a little technical issue, but excited to be here. And we will be focusing on something that has come up for us over the past 12 months or so as we have more and more clients moving from ECC or a non-SAP system, but ECC to S/4HANA, and have considerations around what they should do for revenue recognition. And I am excited because I have my friend and colleague here, Jacek Dudkovsky. Jacek is a Director of Solution Architecture here at Bramasol, but more importantly, Jacek has spent over a decade really involved in revenue recognition from a lot of different perspectives, as well as he touches pretty much all of our projects. And he and I are going to have a dialogue with each other about some of the things that we're seeing. So Jacek, welcome.
Good morning or good afternoon, depending where. Good morning, John, from rainy Seattle, Washington.
Yeah, well, it's beautiful, sunny here in Scottsdale, Arizona. Finally, it's at least not 110 degrees, so that is great. So today's agenda, we did a welcome. We'll talk a little bit about some background. Why are we seeing this? What's going on? Jacek and I talked a number of different times about yeah, and can everybody, I have one person who says they can't hear. Just send me a text. Is there other folks out there who can hear? I know, Jacek, you can hear me because we're talking.
Yes, I can. Yes,
oh, you can hear now. All right, thank you, Kamal. So let's keep moving. We'll talk background, we'll talk about common scenarios, and then the public cloud, because public cloud comes up, and then we'll wrap it up with some key takeaways. Just another reminder, we are recording the session. So feel free to download this session, check it out, share with others. You are open to ask questions throughout the broadcast. So, feel free, just like Kamal did. If you have an issue or you have a question, please weigh in. This is here for you. So to your extent that you want to ask questions, do that. And of course, check out our other webinars. We have over 115 or so different webinars on topics across the finance border, across a number of different perspectives, including revenue recognition, order to cash, BRIM, treasury, leasing. So I would encourage all of you, go check out those other webinars, reach out to us if there's a topic you'd love to hear more about. Where can you check those out? Well, you can come to the website. You can see we have our webinar here announced, Crucial Considerations, but also you can check out a lot of great content and information on RevRec, BRIM, the digital solutions economy, which is this whole move to more of a subscription economy. And you can check those out at the website. We have a LinkedIn pages. We do a lot of posting, so there's some great conversations with people like Patrick Maroney and others over at SAP, Scott Campbell, and a number of others. We have a Facebook page. We are on Apple iTunes. We have well over almost 700 subscribers in our YouTube channel. So I would encourage you to join that as we post more and new and great content there. Some of our content is webcasts or videos. We have some great new videos that will be going up shortly on connecting BRIM to RAR. So check those out. So let's get to the meat of this, Jacek. That's enough advertising and marketing fluff, as you like to call it. Let's talk about these key considerations and maybe a little bit of background. So from my perspective, why are we here? We're here because we're seeing an increasing number of customers who are moving from SAP ECC or other SAP solutions, so sometimes by design, but really we're focused on ECC to S/4HANA. And of course, driving that are a number of key considerations or key ideas. One is, of course, in 2027, SAP will be moving off support for ECC and are encouraging clients to move proactively to S/4HANA. And those journeys are transformative in many cases, but require some considerable thought. So we're seeing customers really starting that process. The second one is to take advantage of the tremendous power of SAP S/4HANA with the Universal Journal, with the database HANA that allows you faster, better, more scalable and flexible solutions, and of course, a lot of the innovations that are focused there. Anything else, Jacek, you want to add to that?
No, you're absolutely, not really, John, because you're absolutely correct. The move by SAP to basically a better, faster platform, given the increasing vast amounts of data that companies are processing, managing, analyzing, it is becoming the tool that can leverage that in the in-memory functionality with HANA, as you said, the financial aspects, especially with the integrated Universal Journal, all of those, especially on the finance side, which has been a focus for Bramasol, we're seeing all these features are becoming critical for businesses to continue improving efficiency operations.
Yeah, and I think that's a very interesting one. And as we start to see that accelerate, we begin to see a lot of thoughtfulness around that. And we just have a quick maybe poll. So we're going to run that quick poll just to get a gauge of the audience. So let's go ahead and do that real quick. It's a real easy one. Hopefully you can see it. Are you considering an S/4HANA journey?
So John, on my slides, I am still looking at the key consideration scenario, so I'm not sure. Oh, now I'm looking at the poll. Thank you. So,
how's that?
Yes.
All right. So far, pretty much everybody is either considering or in the process. Give a couple more seconds. I suppose it's a pretty obvious one. There are one or two of you out here who are not quite there yet, so you're probably thinking about it or have completed it. So with that in mind, we got about 2/3 of you, about a little over half of the folks who have voted, so thank you for that. We woke everybody up. All right, so why don't we close that poll? The vast majority of you, I'll share that 89% of people said yes, they are either considering or on an S/4HANA journey. So, that's great to know because, make it that much more relevant. So moving along, in what we discussed, Jacek, and in what we see with our customers, there really are three common approaches or scenarios. And I'd like you to kind of dive into those. We can take them one by one. One of the ones we're seeing currently now is you're on ECC, you're currently using SAP SD RevRec, so sales and distribution, SD RevRec. Many of you know that as VF44, and you're moving to S/4HANA. Why don't you take a moment to kind of talk a little bit about that, Jacek?
Absolutely, and John, again, my screen shows key considerations. I don't know whether it's my system lagging or whether we need to move to that slide.
That's interesting.
But I'm going to assume it is my system. My apologies. So let's talk about the first scenario you mentioned. You as a customer, you are still in ECC, and you consider moving to S4, and you are an industry that has been impacted by the IFRS 15 regulation, but an industry that does revenue recognition. And just remind everybody, revenue recognition means when you bill or deliver something, there's different points in time. So I might deliver a good but that good takes a while to get to the customer, gets to be installed, and only when it's installed and functioning, I may put that revenue on my P&L as earned revenue. So I have a revenue recognition scenario where I build maybe a month ahead of time, but I cannot put it to P&L until I can actually earn that. So that's where we're talking about RevRec. And obviously there's the IFRS 15, IEC 606 regulation, which talks about fair value allocation and other components in revenue recognition. So again, you are a customer currently on ECC, you've gone compliant to IFRS 15 using the classical SD module revenue recognition and maybe some top-end adjustments or additional functionality, whether it's manual or automated, something. You are compliant and you're moving along, everything's good. Now, obviously, time comes to move to S4HANA, given that SAP is moving into that platform. Well, unfortunately, the SD revenue recognition functionality is moving away. It is no longer available. So what you're looking at in those scenarios is at least a technology replacement project that you would need to execute. I would replace the SD RevRec functionality you're currently operating with a SAP's RAR functionality, at the very least to one-to-one basis. But most of the time what we see is, given that RAR is built for the IFRS 15 functionality, a lot of folks do one-to-one plus. They add additional functionality into the RAR solution to eliminate some of these manual sort of outside of the system adjustments that they've been doing to be compliant with IFRS 15. So that's the most common scenario. And both are really, I think, for industries that didn't have a really significant major impact by IFRS 15. They had some, but it wasn't so critical that they decided to do the investment into doing SAP's RAR back in the 2018, 19, 20 time frame.
Yeah. And of course, as you rightfully mentioned or well mentioned, that we are moving away, and in S4HANA there is no SD RevRec per se, so you need to make that conversion. And some companies, had invested a lot in SD RevRec, so we see that as well. The other scenario that we saw is customers who are on SAP RAR for ECC and moving to S4HANA, and there are a fair number of those, right?
Oh, absolutely, John. And so everything I said before sort of applies. But however, you are now more impacted by the IFRS 15 regulation, and you made the choice to do an investment into the SAP RAR solution. You've deployed that, you are operating on it in steady state. There is new functionality that came out with S4HANA. And you have to ask yourself a question. When you're doing, let's say your project is a technical upgrade to the S4HANA system, most likely you will look at your processes across the board and try to find optimizations and reduce customizations that you may be carrying right now in ECC. And RAR is no different than any other area of the system. There's possibilities to remove some customizations you might have existing in your RAR implementation. There's ability to enable some new functionality. One of the big ones is SAP's optimized contract management, which we'll talk about in a couple of slides as well, which gives you much more flexibility in managing larger data sets in revenue recognition, but also more flexibility in onboarding new businesses onto the RAR platform. Whereas the previous versions of RAR were a little more strict in the sequence of events you needed to do to onboard a new business. So your story changes a little bit when you're doing a SAP RAR to S4HANA RAR transformation while you're doing your ECC to S4 project. So the considerations are slightly a different set.
Yeah. And we'll dive into each of these, by the way, folks, in a little bit more detail, but want to give you a sense of where we're setting up. And of course, Jacek, you pointed out, and we know that a lot of customers who had to comply chose either non-SAP RevRec solutions, and those aren't just RevRec solutions, right? They could be that you chose to do manual or spreadsheets, and there's a lot involved in that. So we are seeing some of those as we see customers who deferred the idea of really, can I just comply? What they thought we can just comply and let's figure out how to move forward when we get to the S4HANA journey.
So. That's true. And John, one comment there, we're seeing that actually with few larger enterprise customers as we there's a number of customers out there that maybe in the last decade or so build out a landscape of systems really following the best of breed approach. And maybe the SAP is at the core of that. Now with offerings from SAP, other offerings outside of RevRec, such as the Brim offering, we're seeing those companies moving their really operational processes, so order to cash processes, into the SAP platform.
Right.
And RAR makes natural sense to also move into the SAP platform then, because now you're looking at an integrated SAP landscape that's built for that integration. So as other things move from non-SAP solutions into your SAP platform, including and moving to S4, RAR, or revenue recognition as a process, also becomes one of those candidates. So we're seeing that as well, again, especially to leverage the integrated nature of SAP products.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, and we are seeing, you know, a number of that. And as you and I are talking to more and more customers about the integrated quote to cash to compliance, if you will, that native integration or that standard integration has become more and more important to provide a seamless experience for customers and the organization. And that's another place that we're seeing companies taking on more and looking at RAR as a much better integrated alternative. And we have and will have a few more, again, webinars dealing with that. This is more helping companies focus on, you know, the RAR portion of the revenue accounting, as we've been talking about. Jacek, you know, one of the things that you and I talked about early on, and we see, is there's 4 major areas, if you will, of consideration regardless of any of those specific scenarios. Every one of those specific scenarios, which we'll dive into, has its own unique characteristics, but each one has all of these. So maybe we can dive into, and one of them that comes up and you and I talk about is, how and when do you move to RAR? What does that mean, Jacek?
So thank you, John. So as a customer, you made a decision that you are looking and you want to implement SAP's revenue recognition tool, the RAR engine. So we talked about these scenarios in a previous slide. With some of the new developments in the RAR functionality, revenue recognition functionality, and the third bullet point mentions about the optimized contract management, you now have options of whether you move to that tool set prior to your overall S4 migration, or whether you move at the time of S4 migration. Both with pros and cons. Obviously, doing it prior, it means you really are spinning up a project and executing a project that could be 6, 9, 12 months in duration prior to then going right on the heels doing yet another large project, which is your S4 migration. But the pro is that you're not boiling the ocean when you're doing it all together. It really becomes scenario dependent, right? And how do you move is also, you heard me say in previous slide, you could do a one-to-one replacement. You decided you need to do RAR, you are on ECC SD RevRec, you're going to do a one-to-one replacement of functionality. You're not going to try to improve revenue recognition as a process, just move the technology and then optimize later. Again, simplifies the project maybe for you, allows you to decouple these things and de-risk it. So those are all considerations you need to ask yourself when you look at your business scenario and your needs. As I said, we have companies who are heavily impacted by IFRS 15 regulation, and they're spending hundreds of hours in manual adjustments, calculations. You know, we see complex Excel spreadsheets that calculate revenue allocation and based upon fair value, calculate SSP allocation, all these things. Well, if you want to eliminate that as part of your RAR project, it becomes the part of the how, right? Your project is both a technology replacement and a optimization or a process improvement. So that really addresses the first bullet point, is the when, along whether it's before or during your S4 transformation, and then how is what is really the scope of that move.
That's a great point. As we see through, one of the big areas that we think are often under-addressed in many cases is migration. Maybe you can talk a little bit about what we're seeing in terms of, you know, not just the data, how much data and what data will you move? So those are careful considerations of of that, but also when will you move it? Do you move it prior to go live, after go live? You know, what are some of those considerations that you would advise clients to think about, Jacek?
Sure, and migration really in the revenue recognition space asks the question of, in a particular contract, where am I in terms of my billings versus earned revenue? And you want that picture to continue and be unchanged as you move platforms from again, ECC to S4. Let's say you have a contract of $1 million, but with your customer, you had agreement, you paid all up front, and you have $1 million sitting in the deferred revenue or contract liability account on your balance sheet, and you are now 2 or 3 months into that project, you have some fulfillment, some earnings in the revenue, you need to move some of that to P&L. You don't want that picture to be changed or impacted as you move platforms. So the question of migration and the way the revenue recognition tool reads migration is a big one. It has always been a big one for revenue recognition projects. And once again, I'm going to go back to some of the new functionality we have with the next bullet point, optimized contract management. In the last few years, we see SAP's bring up more options for you to migrate. With this new optimized contract management, you now have ability to perhaps deploy your RAR solution, your SAP RAR solution, before you actually migrate some of the historical data. And for those of you who are interested in finding out more detail, please reach out to us and we can set up a call and maybe talk about more specific scenarios.
Right.
But the point is that you are no longer tied to the sequence of events that you perhaps have heard about with classical RAR migrations. And that gives you, again, more flexibility in the way, when and how do you move to RAR, as well as what data you migrate. Because let's be also honest, a lot of data that we have out there, legacy data in our systems, is not very clean. It has junk in it. It has things that should have been closed, thrown out, totally changed. And only when it's time to migrate it to some new platform does the business actually spend time in looking at it and cleaning it up. And that always becomes a significant lift on some of these implementation projects.
That's a great point. And Jacek, I think going hand in hand with that idea of migration also is two other things that we often see is testing. And I'll throw testing in as mocks, right? So we often see companies, well, I'll do one mock migration. Maybe I'll do two, but you know, we often have customers who are doing 3 and 4 of them because, you know, you point out, you know, the data can be different in terms of size, volumes, and you have customers whom we know who have, okay, I have tens of thousands of records, or maybe I have 250,000 contracts, but we have other customers who have 250 million contracts. Maybe you can talk about, you know, some, you know, advice or thoughts on, you know, scope and scale from that perspective too.
Well, absolutely. There always is a question when you're dealing with, in this space, revenue recognition. Which contracts, and by contract I mean your agreement with your customer, whether it's symbolized by a single contract in the operational system, like an SD contract or an SD order in a SAP system, or whether it's 10 different SD orders, which together from a revenue recognition perspective make one contract to the customer as seen by the revenue recognition regulation. There's always a question of which of these objects should be moved to the new tool, and you are balancing the effort required to move them versus the return on that move. If I have a 5-year contract, that is complex, has multiple line items, I've been operating it in my current process, and it only has 3 months left in its life when my project is going live, do I want to move 4.5 years of data, historical data, and reconcile that historical data to the new tool, right, just to get the last 3 months, 6 months of that contract running in the new tool? That might be a question that the answer is no, it's just not worth the effort. So we see a lot of that balancing, and it's very specific to scenario and business. Some businesses unfortunately have resource constraints, and they say, look, I would love to not move everything, but you know what? Please build automated tools that will just move everything, because I don't have the personnel to go and verify this data or continue to do dual maintenance on the classical process and a new upgraded process. So your project and your scenarios and in your individual situation will become a factor in that decision. But again, you always balance the value of getting all the data moved to the new platform versus the effort of maintaining that data in your current process.
Yep. No, well said. And again, we're happy to help. You know, if you have more questions about that, feel free to ask them now, by the way, but also, you know, we're happy to follow up. We talked about, you touched on optimized contract management versus classic contract management. What are some key considerations as customers, you know, move? You know, volume clearly is one of them. As you look at the size and number we just discussed, you know, it's one thing to migrate 20 or look at managing 25,000 contracts a month versus 25 million or 250 million. What are some things customers want to consider in this space, Jacek?
Well, optimized contract management is really taking advantage of some of the new power and speed of S/4HANA. And also what we saw in the market, and maybe SAP came to a similar conclusion, is that the very powerful functionality in what we are used to called in the SAP RAR to what we call classic contract management, with that user interface where you can manage the revenue contract, you can manage your POBs individually, fulfill them manually, move them between different contracts. It's great, it's powerful. Not a lot of people use it. They really prefer build me a box that just runs and I don't have to think about it. Automate the rules, let it run, and let it post at the month end to the GL, give me some very clear reports what happens, give me some reports when things don't happen as I expect them to, but don't ask me to be hands-on into this. And really optimized contract management is taking that idea, is doing a lot more real-time integration between the upstream system, the revenue recognition tool, the RER tool in between, and the GL downstream, and scaling it up for larger data volumes, for more speed, more optimized postings. And finally, as you heard me say in the migration bullet point, it gives you more flexibility of onboarding data to the tool. Whereas the classical contract management version really had some sequence of steps you needed to follow to onboard a data set. Optimize loosens up those rules and allows you to go live quicker and have some more bandwidth and more time to maybe clean up your legacy data and bring that on as you are ready to bring it on, while your revenue recognition tool already manages current new data, which you know is clean. So those are considerations, both again in migration and the way you operate. And we are seeing that in the way we operate, but companies with larger volume of transactions, larger contracts, which means multiple line items, they are really preferring for it to be more automated in nature, less hands-on in the revenue recognition UI. I keep calling it RER UI, my apologies. And revenue recognition UI, and more reporting, tell me what things, when things happen, where things happen or go things wrong, but don't ask me to sort of be involved in today, because a lot of teams don't have the bandwidth to do that, to sit in that UI and click buttons, for example, to run a posting job or something like that. So that's optimized contract management. So it brings a lot new functionality, but again, as you move to S4, especially on 2020 version and above, you should be asking yourself whether optimized contract management is the right functionality for me to implement, or whether classic contract management with an SAP RER is still what I would like to keep.
Okay. Yep. And by the way, you know, as is typical, there are hybrid scenarios. We won't dive into them here, but you know, for companies who are interested, there are hybrid scenarios where you can run classic and optimized. There are a lot of puts and takes on that. We're not going to dive into that here, but know that there are options there.
Just very quickly, that's a very good point. So again, it comes to your specific scenarios, and a clear example would be you have a business. 80% of your business is with repeatable contracts that can just keep running, automated, great, everything's great. But then the other 20, maybe you have a unique market segment which you control, which you have a big stake in, and you have these large contracts, but they're all one-off, they're all individual, they all require some handling or individual touch points.
Yeah.
That's this hybrid scenario will come into play.
Yeah. Yep. And an example of that is customers who, our clients who are in software, for example, may have individual contracts, B2C, right? So you may have high volumes of B2C contracts, but when it comes to enterprise contracts, they may include a lot of different elements, including things like delivery, project systems. You may want to consider classic contract management for that. So there are other considerations as you think about the whole move. And speaking of move and upgrade, there are customers out there who, we talk about comply, optimize, transform. In this case, it's do you take a technical move uh, and just take your existing processes, move them over and optimize later, or is this a chance to optimize? We're seeing kind of a balance out there, aren't we?
We are, and throughout this webinar, John, you heard me that it really becomes a balancing test, and these are factors, and the reason we are here today is to talk about what are these factors. You kind of throw them into one pot, you mix it, and you see what comes out. There is no sort of one size fits all, press button, it unpacks itself, right? Where your business is unique. What you've done with your current existing ERP platforms is probably unique. You probably have customizations. Some of these could be taken away and optimized with S4. Some of them might be critical to your market position and your competitive advantage, so you need to keep them. All of these questions you need to ask yourself as planning these projects, and in this case, revenue recognition space. Going back to this previous point of optimize and classic, another example is you already mentioned the SAP's BRIM functionality, which is also something Bramasol focuses on. We're seeing that flexibility of what BRIM offers in the way you bring your products to market, in the way you bundle your products, in the way you price your products, but there's so much flexibility in that. Downstream of that functionality of selling those customized product bundles and product offerings, you obviously have now revenue recognition requirements which need to adapt to whatever you did in your offerings. So again, flexibility of RAR perhaps in classic contract management is what you would want to leverage at that point, because it allows you much more hands-on flexibility to manage each contract more of a unique case. Yeah. However, if you have a repeatable business, maybe optimize is the way you want, because it becomes more of an automated pass-through. It posts in a GL. You don't have to think about it much.
That's a great point. In the recent event we went to, sponsored by SAP and TAC Insights, a large number, almost every customer who got up to talked about that connection between their quote to cash or BRIM and RAR and some of the unique insights and challenges that came from that. So it's a theme that we're seeing more and more. From a general point of view, absolutely, those are great. Thank you, Jacek. Let's dive into some more of these in more detail. So we go back to scenario one. A lot of customers been on SAP sales and distribution, been doing it for a long time. They've customized it. Again, a few issues come up there with regard to timing. And we touched on it, but what's unique about this scenario that's different than doing it from an ECC perspective, for example, from an RAR and ECC perspective, Jacek?
So again, John, the classic story from SAP has been to do the RAR project first, to migrate your SD-based revenue recognition into RAR, and then do an S4 upgrade project second. That story now is changed, or not changed, but has more options, again, with optimized contracts. So you're looking at that. However, there is a price to pay. The price to pay is that you are doing an S4 project as well as a revenue recognition project all at the same time. That might be just boiling the ocean for some folks, and maybe while running your business also might not be something you want to take on. It's just too much risk. You don't obviously want to start up a project that's going to create significant risk for your business and project failure risk. Second, we're with the whole, and this has been started with every SAP as RAR from beginning, there's the decoupling of billings, so revenue as we think of it as invoices to the client, and revenue recognition as in how much of that billing have I earned, and what can I put in my P&L versus my balance sheet. So that decoupling is something that you will have as you move to the SAP RAR tool, regardless if you do it before or during your S4 project. But it also brings both opportunities to create processes which are more focused on order to cash, which is your SD operational functions, and then more focused maybe on the way you run revenue recognition. And it has to do with doing fair value allocation, it has to do with the way you do pricing in SD, it has to do with the way you report, again, balance sheet versus P&L, intercompany revenue. So all these things now you can decouple with the revenue recognition tool. And it's a question of, as you move from your classical tool sets, whether that's something that you want to do with the RAR tool. And that goes back to my comment of whether you're doing a one-to-one technology move, or whether you are doing one-to-one plus, and plus being this optimization part.
Right. And one way of getting your hands around that is, maybe considering things like a phase zero, with an expert in this space who can help you really realize, where are you? Because if you think of it as, just revenue recognition, often, as you point out, this splitting of the operational and financial functions and operations, including RevRec, is something that you need to think about. Often we find, I think, as I've worked with you on a few projects, when you dive into the financial side of it and try to understand that, what is the contract with the customer? How do you define the POBs? When do you do revenue recognition itself in step 5, for example, all of the 5-step model? All of a sudden you begin to see some activities or things that you've done upstream in SD or in other areas of your business that you may want to reevaluate how you do that to simplify and automate the process more, right?
Absolutely. And not a single RAR project happens where sometime during the design and build phase of the projects, you don't have aha moments, especially from the operations finance business, that says, wow, this is new. We didn't think it's going to work this way, or I wasn't aware it has so many new stuff. Let's talk more.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Again, you had, at the end of the day, all of us are thinking about how to make this realistically a successful implementation. And if you are dealing with multiple legal entities, multiple teams, spread global operations, you have to ask obviously, hey, are my financial operations in Europe or in Asia and North America similar? If I start splitting them up from my operational functions like in SD, am I doing a one-size-fits-all, or am I now creating sort of every little team its own little ivory tower of their own processes? All of these things get put in the pot, and you have to think of them. And I call this pot where you just start mixing the ingredients and figure out what will this implementation of this move look like. And you have to kind of talk through those with yourself before you jump into a project. Because we've seen projects go sideways where that has not been closed or thought through very well, and we find ourselves in sort of difficult situations where either the project itself is delayed or the change management becomes extremely painful for the business because they weren't thinking about it ahead of time.
Yeah, and we certainly have processes and ways to manage through that, but the point being, the more you know up front, the more you know, the better off you're going to be. And we encourage you, particularly as companies are moving away from SD RevRec to RAR and moving into S/4HANA, it's probably a good idea to really sit back and understand it's not just a tool move, it's really process and operationally functioned. So we can love to dive into more of that, but let's move to the next one. Even in ECC, I'm already using RAR. Many of our customers started with RAR way back in the day of 1.1, 1.2, or maybe moved to different. I think we're on SP 19 or 20. these days of the updated 1.3. So, really, other questions come up like, do you need to upgrade? Are there workarounds? And again, we talk about migration, and maybe we can just work through each of these, Jacek. And in the case of migration, there's twofold. One of them you mentioned is data and contracts, and we need to talk about that. But there's SAP tools. Why don't we start with, let's just kind of take it in order. What should people think about if do they need to upgrade before? What thoughts do you have on that?
Well, the S4 version of RAR brings significant functionality improvements. So you obviously asking yourself, as I'm moving to this new platform, am I improving the revenue recognition functionality? Am I just doing a technical migration or technical upgrade from again, EC overall platform itself, ECC to S4, and keeping the functionality unchanged to the degree that's possible? So considerations, factors of, again, which will increase complexity of the project, but there's always return on investment, that there are things that you can implement that make the solution more powerful. We've seen from the early years, some of the early adopters of RAR and folks which are working with still are seeing that at the beginning we had to have some workarounds to perhaps address product gaps or things which were not as fully functional as perhaps the market wished. And the great examples in big early versions was the functionality of the call of order in operations, which the revenue recognition tool could not handle. Some companies implemented workarounds. So now elimination of those and bringing things into standard functionality is a factor.
Absolutely.
To continue going down the list, or if you have some comments.
Let me talk a little bit. I talked about migration. I think we've talked a lot about the data and contracts, and again, that totally applies here. But maybe you can take it, in the interest of time, maybe talk a little bit about, there are some standard SAP tools set up to help you with migration, but you have to make sure you think about how do you use those tools, right?
Correct. And the biggest one is reconciliation tools. The revenue recognition engine itself has tools that bring in the migration data. So think of migration processors that will look at your historical data, look at whether it has the right characteristics, load it, create data within the revenue recognition tool. And those tools have been around since initial RAR, and they've actually been improved significantly for larger volumes and more transparent reporting. But the big one that really very few folks think about is what happens after a fact, is how do you reconcile the data? We use the term reconcile the data. It's a very loaded high-level term. And there are standard reports to do so within the revenue recognition tool, but reconciliation for one company might mean totally different things than reconciliation for another company. Am I doing it based upon the total values? Am I looking at number of line items? Am I looking at total number of contracts? Am I looking at total duration of outstanding performance obligations? There's so many questions you need to ask yourself, and then look at the tools that are available from SAP and realize where those tools will fit what you need them to do. And you need to know that fairly early in your project, you don't want to find yourself in the middle of migration and realize that you don't have the tools to finish.
Right, and it's the experience and careful planning. So working with a partner or working with even yourselves to understand that migration process. And of course, I don't want to keep going. We did talk about OCM and CCM. I don't think we need to dive into that, but it is still, again, as you move from ECC to S/4HANA, you move from whatever version you're on into the latest 2023 versions, OP 2023 versions. There are tools in place to help you migrate again from CCM to OCM or from those, but again, you need to think about how to apply those tools. But I would say the same is true of moving from non-SAP, whether you're using a quote unquote best of breed cloud-based solution, or you're doing manual. We've seen, as you pointed out early on, Jacek, some miracles people do with spreadsheets. But it's not just about, everything we talked about previously applies. But here, some of the interesting items are data, right? It's data formats, it's how that data is shared and flows from one system to another as you move from where you are to S/4HANA. And of course, often you have to think about, do I have to do some process re-engineering, right?
No, absolutely. And the most common, simple example just to illustrate this issue is we all have to do with the standalone selling price based allocation as we do IFRS 15, right? Most companies that offer what we are calling multi-element arrangements have to deal with that factor. Even in early days of RAR in migration, what we saw is, well, I have 5 years worth of data and I want to migrate into the RAR tool. And RAR says, that's wonderful. What is the standalone selling price value on that historical data? Well, you didn't have to use that for the last 5 years, so none of that data includes this value. So do you now go back and start recalculating it and adding it, enriching your data? It's a classical example of how you think about your legacy data, which might be perfect for your current process, but might be missing things when you go into the SAP toolset and the way the new processes which you yourself are implementing. And it becomes a lift on these projects where you now have to look at your historical data and not only cleanse it, but also perhaps enrich it to add some of these characteristics. Once again, another factor in when and how and what do you migrate.
Yeah, and I think also what we see is, and maybe this goes to, and I'll use this as an opportunity to kind of go to the next chart, which is integrations. And this is, remember that all of this sits within an ecosystem. And when you have a non-SAP or even other system, you're integrating them in. And you need to think carefully about, if I've established APIs that flow from a non-SAP tool, or even from a tool, let's say it's even Salesforce or non-SAP proprietary tools, how that data is structured, how that data flows may be different as you work with RAR, and you need to make some careful decisions about, how do I do those integrations, but also where am I doing certain functions? Relying on RAR, which is a tool to do revenue recognition, to do data mediation, probably not a good idea. You want to put data mediation, for example, in a place where it belongs, not in RAR or not in SD. There's a better way to do that. So certainly something that we see often. Jacek, I'm going to keep moving here because a lot of people say, well, what about public cloud? SAP does have public cloud solutions, event-based revenue recognition, and contract-based revenue recognition for the public cloud. Again, very powerful solutions. But what are some considerations, and what would you think of is public cloud a fit?
Thanks, John. This question aligns to the larger public cloud S4 versus what I guess the other one is what we're calling private cloud, which is basically hosted SAP system, but it's all your own to customize and integrate into as you see fit. Public cloud gives many advantages overall, right? You have a standardized system that's more optimized, that's perhaps cheaper to operate, but uses standard tools. SAP is hosted, so it really takes it off your hands. There is revenue recognition in there. There's what EBR and CBR, and those acronyms stand for event-based revenue recognition as well as contract-based revenue recognition. And those tools are designed for a specific set of business scenarios which fit a number of industries. So it's a consideration to look at those and whether your business can work with those tools and that functionality offered, and whether those fulfill your revenue recognition needs. Unfortunately, there are industries which have complex multi-element arrangements and complex IFRS 15 implications where perhaps those tools might not fit that need. Nothing is perfect, but they are very powerful tools and are very integrated again into a public cloud consideration. So as you're talking about your S4 project, your condition space conversation should have this EBRR, this CBRR, what you heard me talk about, this OCM versus CCM. All of those are topics that you'd want to cover and make sure you understand and make a decision on.
Absolutely, great point. And again, they are tremendous amount of investment in both of these tools, as well as SAP's tremendous investment in the public cloud. And so the functionality in each of these places continues to grow. So again, reaching out to an expert, reaching out to someone who knows more about these and talk about, can I consider, for example, EBRR to run one of my simple subscription-based solution areas that run quite straightforward? Absolutely, that could be a combination with RAR. Again, like we talked about, a combination of OCM and CCM together. There are options for hybrid approaches. There are options for you to bring business units on and maybe use a quote-unquote central finance-like approach for revenue recognition and feed things in. So again, the beauty is with public cloud, with SAP, there's options. So with a couple of minutes left, Jacek, I always like to call this the big so what. We're going to call it takeaways. I think a few key takeaways, and thank you for, for your insights. Consider project complexity. Consider it on a number of different levels, I would say. Number one is, what is the complexity? Do you have multiple business units across multiple countries that are using different types of scenarios? What are those scenarios? How complex is it? How much do you want to take on in terms of changing the front end and the back end and doing everything together? Consider usage scenarios. Where again, I apologize, typo here, but OCM versus CCM. Do you have scenarios where a hybrid would work? Does OCM work better because you're a high volume, high velocity business, or are you more lower volume, high complexity? And certainly those tools may work. It also relates to the hands-on. Consider data migration needs and business continuity. Migration is not just simply about migrating master data. You have to think about your transactional data and how much of that do you need to run your business on a daily basis. Also, as you begin to think of the constructs within your business and your contracts, how does that data grow and how will you need to migrate data in the future? So, think about that. Consider public cloud options. Public cloud is a viable option for many businesses as they get up and running on simple, and I want to call them simple, some straightforward sell from stock or subscription ideas. You can do others in other cases where you need contracts, but you're doing straightforward, easy contracts, whether it's in professional services, for example. So consider cloud as an option. And finally, I want you to walk away with one thing I think is so crucial, and revenue recognition is all about the 5-step model. And in our video about revenue, RevRec Reimagined, we talk about applying the 5-step model. I would strongly encourage anybody who is going through, whether it's a new RevRec project, an upgrade, an optimization, so many things are changing with regard to applying that 5-step model of, really looking at who is the customer, what is the contract, what are the POBs, what's the transaction price, allocation, and finally, how do you recognize? Each one of those 5 steps will cause you to think about the project, think about your process, not just about the tool, but about the process. So with that, let's wrap up. We are 1 minute past the top of the hour. Thank you all for hanging on. Thank you, Jacek, as always, for some tremendous insights. I appreciate you taking time out of your really busy schedule to to speak with our customers and speak with me.
No, absolutely, John. And my apologies for running a little over time and maybe rambling on a little bit. But for anyone that has any follow-up questions or any comments, feel free to reach out to me or John for this webinar, and I'm sure John will share email addresses. We can definitely talk about these topics more, or talk about your specific scenarios or your questions. Again, this is
Thank you.
yeah,
All right, thank you guys. Thanks everybody. Make it a great day.